You are listening to the Bearly Audible Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Bearly Audible Podcast. I am your host, Justin Romine, alongside Bears. Bears, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Justin. How are you today?
I am doing as well as I can with a cold I picked up on vacation, but I'm hanging in there, and so far my voice is holding out, so that's good.
Excellent. Well, you know, if the voice tends to give out during the big show today, please feel free to use hand gestures or any other way of communication, especially telepathy, which I'm sure Tara and I are probably fairly good at. And of course, after knowing you we've known each other since the late 50s, haven't we? So we kind of know each other's signs and signals. Justin's like,
Today,
where the hell do I go with that?
yeah, today we have Tara Butler. She is a yoga instructor, artist, chicken farmer, amongst other things. Tara, thanks for being here. Can you give us a little bit of background about you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm currently teaching yoga in Bloomington, Indiana, and I also read tarot cards and oracles. I've worked in the past as a birth doula. I wouldn't say I'm an herbalist necessarily, but I do have interest in homesteading, herbal farming, the chickens, as you've said, and really anything with holistic and natural living.
Excellent. And then I saw you had a guest behind you, a cat.
Oh, yeah, I'm also a cat lady. I've
All
got 3
right.
cats, 1 dog, and 7 chickens, and 4
Wow.
kids.
And 4 kids. Wow. I have 4 cats and 2 kids.
Nice. I would love to get another cat.
They're great.
They're experts at meditation also.
So, how did you kind of get into being a yoga instructor? Did you just start taking classes early and then figured it out and decided to share your knowledge?
Um, well, I really got into yoga in 2019. But prior to that, my whole life I've really been interested in like connecting with spirit and my body and my soul. So in 2019, I actually got started with yoga. I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was just looking up prenatal yoga on YouTube, just mainly for the physical benefits to my body at that time. Um, but then I fell in love with yoga and continued it even after my pregnancy. And the way it happened for me is the way it happens for a lot of people. They're initially drawn to it for the physical benefit. But then as you go deeper into it, you start to also notice spiritual benefits, the meditation parts of yoga. And so after I was practicing on my own with YouTube for a few years and started noticing all of these benefits within myself, I thought, I would really love to become a teacher so that I could share this with other people. And so then in 2023, I took my first yoga teacher training, and that was in Hatha Vinyasa yoga, which is like the typical yoga that you would think of, like if you were to just go to like a normal yoga class, mostly physical postures, a little bit of breath work. So I completed that training, but I still wanted to go deeper. I still felt like I wanted to understand more of the philosophy and the more esoteric aspects of yoga. So I then signed up for a Kundalini yoga teacher training, and that's where my passion really lies. And I'm going to start teaching a Kundalini yoga class next month here in Bloomington. And in Kundalini yoga, we do the physical asanas, but we do a lot of breath work. There's chanting of mantra. There's use of mudra, which is like the different hand gestures and positions. There's a lot of meditation involved. So it's a lot more than just like a fitness class or like a stretching class.
Yeah. So, you are in Indiana, in the Midwest. Have you always been from the area?
Yep, I still live in the same town I was born in. It's called Bloomington. It's a college town, so it's still pretty rural though. But like, there's a little bit more here. I was born here, but I grew up like 30 minutes away in a tiny, tiny town. Like my high school class had 65 kids in it. So there was no yoga. There was not a lot of like any of the things I'm
Yeah.
interested in here. But we would just drive 30 minutes to Bloomington where it was more like hip and happening, and there was like art, music, yoga, all that. So I knew as soon as I graduated high school, I wanted to move up here. And I also went to college here. So I've just been here ever since. And there's a really good yoga community and artist community. I'm a fiber artist. I crochet and I make quilts too.
That's awesome. I'm from next door, Illinois, born and
Okay.
raised in a small town about an hour west of Chicago, called Belvedere, Illinois. We're really not known for anything other than there was a Chrysler car factory there.
Okay.
A lot of my family worked there. And then there's a couple other factors, a Green Giant and a Dean Foods there as well. But we were right next to Rockford, which you've probably heard of. And they were, Rockford's best known for the female baseball league, the
Mm.
Rockford Peaches. If you remember the movie A League of Their Own,
Okay.
that
Yeah.
was the Rockford Peaches, the baseball team. So,
Yeah, it's
uh,
it's actually known as the All-American Girls Professional
yes.
Baseball League. In fact, when I was doing television in upstate New York, um, long story short is I met Penny Marshall and I actually worked on A League of Their Own, and she and I used to go shopping for Oriental rugs up in Cooperstown, New York. And apart from that, when I was doing television in upstate New York, I had a lot of the women on who actually played in the league back in the day, back in the 40s, when all the men had to go off to World War II, of course. And these women were incredible. I mean, they were just like in the film itself. Just incredible women. I remember one from Boston, and she used to say when she was playing, the fans would always yell, "Go Boston!" And these people had this grit and this sort of backbone, man, that you just don't see too often. These are women who, if you tell them to go out and build an airplane, they could do it from scratch, with a band-aid and a toothpick. That's the type of attitude these people had back in the day. And of course, the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League actually lasted up until the early 50s, believe it or not.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've also met a couple of the ladies that were on it because they came to Rockford often, and I worked in Rockford TV. I had to interview them a couple times. They were super sweet.
Yeah, aren't they nice?
Okay. I remember watching, like, I was like a small kid when I watched that movie, so I didn't know like the town or anything, but that's awesome that you guys are both connected like that.
Yeah. Did you
Uh,
play any sports growing up?
No, I'm oddly as it sounds being a yoga teacher, I don't really enjoy sports or like working out or anything like that. I played softball as like a elementary kid, and then in high school I ran, but I was never into like any of the main sports really.
And I was going to ask, that's why I brought up I was from the Midwest. I was going to ask that. I almost lost track already, but um, because of the harsh winters, and I have chronic back issues, I would often be very, very sore, particularly in the mornings because of the cold. Do you find that yoga can help that? I used to do some yoga. I would just go on YouTube and find lower back pain yoga. And it would do stuff that, I could do stuff that was mainly just stretching, but wouldn't be too taxing. But is yoga good for muscles and bones and all of that?
Yeah, definitely. And having a morning practice when you're first waking up, even if it's just 5 minutes, really helps wake up the body, get the blood circulating, get your muscles warmed up for the day ahead. And What I tell people who are wanting to develop a practice is if you can do it every day for even 5 minutes, that's more beneficial than like waiting to the weekend and doing an hour-long class, because it's the consistency, not only for your body, but also you're developing a discipline to like get up and do something for yourself each day. And you also become more aware of your body. Our body is sending us signals all day long. More noticeable if you wake up, you can feel tight and that you need to stretch, but it's communicating with us constantly. And it's very rare that we really take a moment to slow down and listen to what our body's trying to tell us. So, yoga practice, even if you're just getting into it for the physical aspect, is so beneficial and helpful.
There you go, Bears. That's how you can kind of combat your meat locker hotel room.
Well, actually, it's a really nice suite here. It just gets cold occasionally. And through various zones that we've implemented, space heaters to keep it warm in different parts of the suite. Also, you might want to try Qigong, Justin.
Yeah, I've tried that a couple times, just like a workshop here and there. I don't know a lot about it, but I really enjoyed it. And that's something I've thought about trying to get into a little more.
What is that for the listeners that don't know? And me, I have no idea. I've never even
Well,
heard that.
Qigong is like a form of Tai Chi. It's a form of movement and breath work that sort of restores and helps maintain proper body energy and function throughout the entire system through movement and breath work again. And, it's something that most Westerners would most likely benefit from. Wouldn't you think, Tara?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of Kundalini yoga that is inspired by Qigong. So it's like a mindful, like a moving meditation almost.
Yeah.
And rather than just sitting there, you're doing movements, but they're like there's a momentum, or like you're moving with the breath. And like the Kriya I was doing this morning, a Kundalini yoga class is called a Kriya, had a few movements in it that were taken directly from Qigong.
I would
The Qi
definitely.
the Qi is like the life force energy that flows through your body, and in a lot of Eastern like martial arts will refer to it as Qi. In yoga it's referred to as prana, but it's the same thing. It's the life force energy. So through different breaths and movement you can circulate it better throughout your body.
Yeah,
I would definitely look into that.
it's that stuff that most people squander throughout their lives.
Yeah, I would definitely look into that. That sounds like something I can do. I know how to breathe.
Yes, that's what we say. If you can breathe, you can do yoga.
Do you also participate in like Reiki?
I don't. I've never taken a training or anything, but I hear a lot about it just in the spiritual and bodywork circles that I'm in. So like I'm familiar with what it is, but I don't know a lot about it myself, like from personal experience.
Yeah, I really don't either. I worked on I believe it was like an informational video or sort of documentary when I lived in Las Vegas. Um, I came in to shoot video of somebody doing it, and I had a lot of questions because I didn't really understand it. It's just, I guess using your mind to kind of push through energies and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that it was interesting to me. So I was just curious if you had known anything more. Barris, do you know anything about Reiki?
Well, yeah, actually, I do. Just as Tara was saying, it's like redistribution of the life force and strengthen it where it might be weak. Um, we as humans, we're not these earth suits that we're currently looking at, the three of us right here. We're the energy and the consciousness that animates it. And just like your vehicle, you have to do certain things to maintain it, change the oil, rotate the tires, do a tune up and alignment. And in many ways, doing inner work is basically doing your own alignment, especially if you're doing inner shadow work, working on things that might trigger you, which can also drain the life force. And that's why a lot of people feel more comfortable in nature, wouldn't you think, Tara? I mean, I feel
Yeah.
totally energized, and that's probably why I went on that 6-year voyage across the United States and just hung out in Oregon for so long, because hanging out there with those ancient trees and with that great energy, it just renews you, you know? And you don't want to come back to the Maya or this quote unquote civilization just because you feel so healthy out there. But eventually everyone has to come back down from the mountain, right? You know? And I'm sure it's a long-winded sort of answer to your question, but um, it's super important to realign yourself so you can continue functioning and carrying out your responsibilities and duties that you may have as a family person, or if you're in business or doing something creative, or if you just have a desire to stay on earth and stay grounded to some degree. We all have to recalibrate every once in a while. And for a lot of us who have become awakened, the easiest way and the most natural way for us is to gravitate to some Eastern way of doing that, of restoring our energy, you know?
Yeah. And we had on Susan a couple podcasts back, and she was a, a tarot reader and also, a psychic. I see that you are a tarot reader and an oracle reader. What is the difference between the two?
So tarot is a very specific system, and any tarot deck you buy will have the same uh, cards in it. So like the Magician, the Lover, the Hermit. Um, they're representing different archetypes that all people experience on the journey of our soul. And while each deck may have a specific theme, like, the butterfly tarot or the whatever tarot, it's going to always have those same archetypes in it. That's the major arcana. And then there's the minor arcana cards, which there's 4 suits that represent the different elements. So all tarot decks are going to have those. And then oracle cards, there's no set system. Like for oracle cards, it could be anything. So like, I have one that's like the Sacred Map Oracle, and each card represents like a physical place you might be in your life. Or basically, Oracle, anyone can make a set of Oracle cards and put whatever they want. So there's not like a set tradition with those. I find that tarot, you can go a lot deeper. You may end up with like a 10 card spread or something, versus an oracle card is kind of a little more basic and surface level. Like on that, I might just draw one in the morning, and whatever I draw is kind of like my inspiration for the day or something like that, as opposed to asking for like a super deep outlook that's very in depth.
Okay. And so when you look at, so you interpret them differently, correct?
The oracle cards.
Yes.
Yeah, an oracle card, there's not even a lot of interpretation. Like it might have just like an affirmation written on it, or one symbol or something like that, and it will come with a guidebook, telling you a little bit about that card. So there wouldn't be a lot of interpretation you do on your own, versus like the tarot. Once you understand any of those archetype cards, you don't really need a guidebook, because it doesn't matter what tarot deck it is. Like it's the same energy, just with like different artwork or a slightly different theme.
And how did you first feel inspired to pick up the tarot deck? I mean, do you remember the exact moment, or the first sort of stirrings, where you're thinking, I could do this, I feel called to it, and maybe you have some past life connection to it where it just felt natural, and of course in this lifetime you were maybe still living in the 3D world with the muggles, but something called you to it, and when you connected to it, it just felt like you were coming home again, like to one of your innate skills that you've already had and developed.
Yeah, definitely. So the first card deck I ever got was probably over 20 years ago. I was maybe like 18 or something, and it was actually an oracle card deck, and it was called the Goddess Oracle, and each card in it was just a different goddess from different pantheons all over the world. Because at the time I was really into like goddess magic and divine feminine. I was working with pregnant women as a birth doula, so I was just drawn to that deck for the goddess energy. And then I got into the tarot after that because I just fell in love with my first card deck. And so I became a collector, or at this point I call myself a card hoarder because I have so many. And some of them I really connect with on a deep level, and I'll use those repeatedly. And other ones just have cool artwork and I have them like just to have them.
Wow. One of my favorite people on YouTube is Divine Empress Tarot 333. Are you familiar with her? She's been
No.
so Tara, can you tell us how but before you had your awakening, what was your life like? You know, what inspired you to awaken? Was there one event or a series of events where you're like, you know, there's got to be more to life than this? And in fact, maybe in dreams, your dreams were calling to you to remember and to awaken. And can you remember, like, when you found your first guide? So for people out there who are going through the awakening process or through the dark night of the soul, especially if they're like, you know, going through some difficult relationship stuff, and they're also feeling these other just sort of, you know, calls to awaken, you know, that there's more to life than what's going on. What advice do you have for them too?
Well, to a degree, I've always, even as a child, felt just like there was more, and just in tune with nature. I grew up way out in the country. My grandmother, I was very close to her. She was a neighbor, and she would never have considered herself like a witch or anything like that. But she was like a country woman. She worked with herbs. She, did all of those things. And she also was like a big pillar in the community. She never like worked a job outside the house, but she did a lot of community work. She had like a sewing circle at her church. So she would take me, my interest in like women's circles really went back um, to that. And then when I went and kind of into a deeper awakening, I would say when I moved out of my little tiny town and moved to Bloomington to go to college, and I began to be more exposed to other people from coming here from all over the world and all different belief systems. And I just randomly, as an elective, ended up in a folklore class, which I loved. And I started studying of all different religions and traditions and things from all over the world. So I ended up taking a belly dance class, and I just really started exploring all of these things. And then my awakening went even further when I got pregnant at 20. So I was still pretty young, and I started feeling just like the divine energy, like the goddess within me with my pregnancy. And I started studying like goddess magic. That's when I got that goddess card deck. I also began experimenting with different plant medicines and psychedelics. I went on a canoe trip, like a 14-mile canoe trip on a river. And that was my very first experience ever taking psychedelics. And I had the most beautiful experience. I just like saw rainbows in the water, and I felt so connected to nature. And that just encouraged me to take things even further. And I feel like my life has just been like a constant awakening. Like, I don't feel like I'm ever like, okay, I awakened, or, I had an awakening here and then had another one later. It's just been a constant evolution. I definitely recommend yoga for people who want to tune in with themselves and not. The good thing about yoga is you don't have to feel like you're following a religion. Like the goddess magic might be too much for some people, or like psychedelics or whatever. But like with yoga, you can be religious, you can be an atheist, because there's no like dogma to it. It's really just going within yourself and connecting to whatever that is for you. So I would definitely recommend yoga and just experimenting with things, listening to people who came from a different belief system than you or lived in a different place than you, and just remain open.
Well
Yeah,
said.
and you said your bio says that you're also a mushroom forager. Do you do
Yes.
that for hallucinogenics or for food or both?
No. No, I forage for morel mushrooms. I don't know if
Mm,
you guys have morel mushrooms where you're at. So it's a edible mushroom, and it's in my opinion, it's the best edible mushroom. It's also nearly impossible to cultivate, so you have to forage for it.
Yeah, they grow underground, right?
Yeah, so they come up directly out of the dirt as opposed to like growing on a log or something like
Right.
that. And there's not a lot of there is something called a false morel, but there's not a lot of like fake lookalikes to a morel. It's a very distinct look. So you don't have to be like an expert mycologist to go mushroom hunting. I've hunted morels like since I was a child also. Um, Something else from my childhood, my dad, before he retired, was a forester at our local Navy base here, which is like huge, so many acres. So like that also inspired me from a young age to like be out in nature. And so um, the morel mushroom hunting just came naturally with that. And people do hunt them to sell them. They're very like highly prized and will sell for 50 or $60 a pound, but I've never sold mine because they're like priceless to me. I wouldn't
Mm.
sell them for any amount of money.
yes, they're wonderful gifts from the forest. I remember being in Western Oregon and just going out and casually seeing these beautiful morels from the forest. And if I wasn't going to cook with them or use them, I certainly wasn't going to pick them. I would leave them for
Hmm.
someone else or just appreciate them for what they were. They were a gift of the forest, and um, the fungi out in the western part of this incredible nation spans, I don't know how many hundreds of miles, but it's one of the oldest and largest life forms on Earth as well. And of course, they can communicate.
Right, like the mycelium network is
Yeah,
like the internet for the trees and everything, which
yeah,
I find also amazing. And like the morel that we see above the ground is only the fruiting body, and like how expansive and large like the whole network is just really mind-blowing to think about. And like you can feel uh that oneness to me, like when I'm hunting morels or when I find one or when I eat one, I can just like it's like a fairy food. Also, I like to call mushrooms fairy food, and just makes me feel connected.
that's
So
right.
where do you go to find them? A forest, somewhere wet. What kind of conditions
Yeah,
do they need to grow?
so the soil temperature, there's a short window where I live, from about mid-April to early May, like a few weeks. The soil temperatures need to reach about 50 degrees and stay that way. And you also need to have a decent amount of rain. So some years will be a really great morel year, other years like not very good, just depending on the weather. But they often will pop up in those same spots because of the underground network. So like if you find a really good spot, which people will call a honey hole, you guard that secret. Like you don't tell anybody, or people will ask like, I want to go mushroom hunting with you. And I'm just like, no, like,
Blindfold
uh,
them.
yeah, so people will get real defensive about their spots or put up a trail camera or whatever. But like I said, I grew up way out in the country, so I can go out to my mom's where I grew up on her land, and nobody else is out there. So I've got a few good spots there. Then other people who don't have a private place to go, they'll go like in the state forest or whatever. But it's like everybody's going, so you just got to like hope nobody got there before you.
Now you're also a fiber artist. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got involved in making stuff.
Okay. So my grandma, who was like a major guide for me that I told you guys a little bit about earlier, she was like a master expert quilter. And I grew up right across the street. My mom worked and was a single mom. So I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house, and I wanted to sew ever since I was big enough to know what that was. And she always told me, like, well, when you're 8 years old, then I'll train you on the sewing machine. So I just like couldn't wait to turn 8 so I'd be old enough to learn the sewing machine. And so I started quilting, sewing at 8 years old, and have ever since. And then it wasn't until my early 30s that I discovered crochet. And that was just like randomly. I taught myself off YouTube, and I fell in love with crochet because I am like a very restless person. It's really hard for me to just like take a break and sit down and like not do something. But with crochet, I can be setting down and still doing something. So like I'll take a break and like sit down, but sit here and like work on my project. And also it's easy to take a ball of yarn and a crochet hook and get it in and out, versus when I'm quilting, you need a lot of space to lay out all your fabric. You got to set up the sewing machine and everything. So after I found crochet, it really made it more accessible and easy for me to do art when I didn't have like a dedicated space to get out everything it takes to quilt. And then I also started making meditation shawls after I got into yoga with crochet. And the idea behind that, not just in yoga, but like any religion where you see someone like covering their head, like the idea behind a turban or like a woman covering her head or like a prayer shawl is like it gives you that feeling of kind of being enclosed. It creates a space for you. There's an arc line that runs above the crown of the head. So like in religious paintings, you might see like a glowing halo behind like Jesus's head or whatever. And that's the energy in the arc line. So if you can wrap a shawl around you or put something over your head, you create that container to have a meditative experience. Also, meditation lowers the body temperature because you're at rest. So I really got into making these crochet meditation wraps or prayer shawls after I got into my yoga journey. And I do sell those also.
I was going to ask if you sell those. Do you go to craft fairs or have an online
Um,
shop?
right now, I just have an Etsy and like sell them to people I know who know that I make them. But I would love, it is a goal of mine to like do a booth at an art fair or something sometime. I would love to do that.
Tara,
So it's
did your grandmother preserve like family history in her quilts and tell stories?
Yes, she did. And also, one of her main things that she did was she was a genealogist. She worked a lot at the cemetery next door, the church next to us, but she also traveled around the state, and she was an author, and she wrote books on different cemeteries and like Revolutionary or Civil War veterans who are buried there. So she was very into local history, family history. We lucky for me, I didn't have to try to like research my ancestry because she had it all done. And yes, a lot of things like that are put into quilts. There are certain geometric patterns that were even used for like the Underground Railroad. Um, you'd sew a certain pattern and hang it out over your fence, and it meant whatever. And then she had a quilt design that she just called "Do Your Own Thing," and it wasn't a geometric pattern; it was just a bunch of squares. But inside each square, you would make a little patch, or she would have our family member sign their signature, and then she would embroider that into the square. So it was just all of these squares that were significant for whatever reason to our family or to whoever she make them for. Another thing she would do is like make t-shirt quilts for people, which I'm saving right now. My daughter, like all her soccer shirts and her ballet shirts and stuff, and when she can't wear them anymore, like making a quilt out of those. And she would make, she had the sewing circle, so they also made quilts for money for the church. Like if someone would pass away, making a quilt for the family out of their old clothing. So a lot of really significant things can be put into a quilt, which I find special.
And I would like to encourage people listening to this too to go out and visit those country churches and support them, because when they have their rummage sales and fundraisers, you find some of the best food on earth at those places and events.
Oh yeah, they put out a cookbook too that they would, sell, and I've got that, and you can't get much better than like grandma's old-fashioned recipe. I mean, I'm on Pinterest with all kinds of fancy recipes all the time, but some of those like real basic ones that we would have at like the church meeting, it's just such a comfort food.
It also just occurred to me too that at one time quilts were like the storage medium of preservation, like the SSD drive or the hard drive of culture at one time. And not only was it necessary oftentimes to recycle the fabric and material, especially out on the American plains, because it was so scarce at one time, you would also want to find a way to preserve that history, because life was fleeting out there, man, in the early days. It was brutal and difficult. So that was one way to preserve family history. What kind of quilts do you like to make, Tara? Do you have a specific design or color combo, or is there a story you're trying to tell, or are you just trying to be creative and let the materials sort of tell you what it wants to be?
For me, I really just love working with like bright colors, funky patterns, uh, like funky patterns print in the fabric. The patterns that I sew are pretty basic, like squares or variations built off of a square. But I find joy. My favorite part is picking out the fabrics for whatever color theme, or like I made a baby quilt the other day that had this really great like little mushrooms and field mice, and it just was so whimsical. So most of my things are themed kind of like a colorful, whimsical uh, theme.
If
Fantastic.
somebody wanted to see your work, how can they get to your Etsy shop?
So I have my Etsy shop is called Cosmic Quilts and Crochet. There's not a lot of items in it right now, but I do have a Facebook page, Cosmic Quilts and Crochet, and on there it's like every item I've ever posted. So I haven't restocked my Etsy shop in a while, but anyone who wanted to look me up could find it there. It's mostly crochet stuff on there right now.
Is crocheting and quilting a way for you to maybe relax? How do you get into a zone? How does it work psychologically for you?
Yeah, I definitely enter into a flow state or like a meditative state, basically. Um, just like any hobby that someone has that you get into, and then before you know it, like an hour's passed and you've just like been in the zone. That's what it does for me. And also, um, I like to work on it while I'm like listening to music, or like I'll put on like a yoga podcast or just whatever to give me something to listen to while I'm doing it. And in that way, I feel like those are the vibes I'm like literally stitching into whatever I'm making. So I feel like it's infused, like I'm holding a high intention like while I'm doing it.
So Tara, you're part of the great mosaic of this experience that we call life, and as part of an individualization of source, do you have any personal insights or epiphanies that you have arrived at in your number of years on the planet that you might like to share with the world at large?
Um like insight about what?
Just your own personal insights from your own personal journey on the path. Is there something that just keeps reoccurring, or that you're like aha moment, and that you just can't wait or couldn't wait to share with the world at large, or with one of your best friends?
Yeah, I would say like for me it would be yoga. Yoga stuff. And that's like I could talk about yoga all day long. But really that's because it opens up that space to have insights or downloads, and take you back to your true self. Like we're all born as only our true self. Like we come directly from source. All of our chakras are open. No society and authority, nobody's put any of their stuff onto us yet. But so slowly over time, that all builds on, and it's like an onion. Through yoga practice, we can slowly peel back those layers and get back to that inner core that never went anywhere. It just got all the stuff piled up on top of it. So using like breath or mantra or movement or meditation to peel back the layers and allow the space to connect. One thing I've really gotten into, my personal favorite thing that I want to share more of with people, is mantra and chanting. I'm really interested in sound, sacred sound, science of sound. I love live music and things like that. So discovering mantra, at first it was intimidating. Like, I don't want to chant out loud in front of everyone else in class or whatever. But what was the aha moment for me was having it explained to me the difference, like between mantra and singing, for example. Like, when you sing, it's more about how it sounds to other people. You're putting on a performance, or maybe not. Some people sing just for themselves, but it's really about the sound. But in a mantra, it's the vibration that you're creating in your body. So like, you're not chanting for somebody else, you're chanting for yourself. And so it doesn't really matter, how it sounds on the outside. And so once I like had that moment and began to think of it like that, I really got into chanting and understanding, like, if you ever watch a bowl of water that's like near a speaker, the base is like making patterns in the water. And then you think about how our bodies are 70% water. So when we chant and we make that vibration within ourself, it's literally affecting our whole body, like everything within our body. And you just become immersed in your own sound, like going to a gong bath or a sound bath, but you're doing it to yourself from within. So that's what I'm really excited to share with people. That's why I love Kundalini yoga, because we do a lot of chanting in Kundalini yoga. And a lot of just kind of typical yoga classes have been westernized and kind of whitewashed into like a fitness class. And that whole like aspect of your inner self and your soul is kind of missing from that. So I really want to like share with people the power of that everybody has within themselves to be in their own vibration.
Just as you were describing that, I felt sort of bathed in this golden light of like the Hanuman Chalisa, That's why I was
Yes,
smiling so much. I'm like just letting it wash over me, essentially. Have
I
you
love that.
learned all the verses to the Hanuman Chalisa?
No,
I certainly haven't.
no, I haven't. Most of the chants I do, and definitely all the ones I teach, are very basic, like a beej mantra that's literally one syllable, or like a short mantra that's like a few syllables or words. One powerful practice I like to do is chanting ong, like ONG, because when you make that ng sound, like as if you were saying the word bring, you feel the tongue strike the upper palate. So when you're chanting ong over and over, you're literally putting those vibrations up into the pituitary gland, like directly above the upper palate. And even just chanting it for 5 minutes, when you're done, like you feel completely like in a different vibration. So a chant doesn't even have to be something really complex. It can be something one syllable, very simple.
I feel that. Yeah. You have a great aura, by the way.
Oh. Well, thank you. I've developed a daily sadhana. So sadhana is a Sanskrit term that just means your daily spiritual practice. It's like whatever you do. So for me, that's like I get up, I do a morning yoga. Sometimes it's like a 10-minute yoga because I've got all the kids and animals and that's all I can fit in. And I'll usually draw like one card. And instead of it being like some in-depth question, it's just like, what's a reminder for me today? And then whatever I draw, I just keep in mind. And so having a daily sadhana and keeping up with that every day can help keep you in a raised vibration. And like, I'll notice if one day I miss it, I notice a difference, like my attitude, and just it's better for everybody in my house if I like have my time to keep my vibe high. So I love that you saw my aura and that it's working out.
Well,
Yeah.
you guys are doing some amazing work out there in Indiana. Just you and your family, like, holding that love and emanating that love and that openness out there. And I feel it's really needed. And the work you do, you can feel the reverberations too. Like, your energy just is felt far and wide through your friends' network and the art you produce. So thank you for that. And I know it's not the easiest of work to always do, especially when you have your 3D life and other things to take care of. And how do you balance all of that? You know?
So actually I'm only just now getting back into teaching yoga. I've taken off the past year because I was recovering from a hip injury and surgery. Um, so, and then like divine timing, because I had that in mind, like, well, how am I gonna do all this once I'm recovered? Uh, but if the universe really wants you to do something, it will provide a way for that to happen. So my aunt, who's retired just this year, ended up buying a house 4 houses down from me, and now I have her to like watch the kids when I need to go teach. So that's like the logistics of like how I get away from my house, but also just keeping my discipline to keep my own daily practice. And sadhana is what makes it possible for me mentally. Because I'm kind of like a anxious person. Like I have a naturally high energy and kind of high anxiety level. So like I really need to keep on my meditation, or like I said, like when I'm setting down, like keeping my hands busy with crochet. All these are ways that I mentally am able to take on everything that I do. And there's also a concept in yoga philosophy called pratyahara. It's one of the limbs of yoga, and that's withdrawal of the senses. So I've had to, like, I used to get so frustrated. I'd be trying to do yoga or meditation. My kids would be in the background making noise, and I would think, why do I even try? Like, I'm just going to give up. But over time, with discipline, you very slowly, like, now I won't even notice they're there. Like, I'm so tuned in with myself, and I've tuned out the extra senses. So that also helps me.
Well, that's great. Justin, do you meditate?
I have in the past. I kind of studied Buddhism a little bit when I was younger, and I meditated quite a bit. Now, if I'm having problems sleeping, I'll meditate for a little bit first, and then I'm usually relaxed enough to get to sleep. But I, I guess I'm just too lazy and busy to do it too much anymore. But uh, I do know it worked. It had its own, positive vibes and stuff like that. So I have experience with it, but not too recent.
I think it.
I went through a phase. I was into Buddhism before I found yoga. Actually, that was my first introduction to meditation. Was through another random class I ended up in college. It was a Tibetan meditation class. So like that was my first introduction to it, and I didn't find yoga till like 15 years after that. So that's cool that we have that in common.
I think one of the biggest misnomers is about meditation is what's this thing called enlightenment, right? I began meditation at age 13. My guides were sort of compelling me to begin meditation. So I began sitting meditation, zazen, twice a day, morning and night. And I sort of got tired of that. Long story short is, after meditating for about 9 months, I was in the smoking area of my high school, because back in the dark ages, there were still smoking areas. And that's where the cool people hung out, the misfits, the artists, the poets, the rejects. I'm Gen X, right? So that's where all the cool kids hung out. Um, and I wasn't a big smoker of tobacco. A long story short was, I was sitting out there meditating one day. It was a spring day, and all of a sudden, boom! peak experience, head blows off, pops off, all the information floods in, past, present, and future. It seemed like it was forever, but in reality, it was probably less than a nanosecond. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is it. Like, now what do you do? You can't get up and go back to class. Your life isn't the same anymore. You're a completely different sort of individual at this point. And so I just sat out there in the smoking area, just, I mean, because at that point, you've made it to the top of the mountain. What more is there to do? Well, of course, enlightenment isn't remaining at the top of the mountain. It's what do you do now? How do you integrate all of that information and that experience for not only the betterment of yourself, but to increase the good for the rest of the people in your family and your friends? That's true enlightenment. What do you do with the information? Have you had that experience yet, Tara?
Oh yeah. And it's like that saying, like, what do you do now? Well, chop wood, carry water, just go back to your life. And there's something I like to think of, and that's kind of my mission statement with Soul Link Yoga, which is the name of my yoga business, I guess you would call it. And that is living life as sadhana. So like, not only is your sadhana your daily spiritual practice, but you can live your whole life as sadhana, just being more mindful in anything that you're doing, or just reframing things when you're doing them. Washing the dishes, just being mindful, or cooking food. I don't enjoy cooking. I have to cook a lot because I have a family of 6. So I reframe to myself, instead of thinking like, I don't want to be doing this, like I switch it to gratitude. Like, I have a place to cook, I have food. So to me, all of these moments of enlightenment or a samadhi that we have, they're very temporary, but we can bring back what we experienced in that moment and try to infuse the rest of our life with that. And I think that's, like you said, some people have this idea like, oh, you reach enlightenment and then you're there. But the thing is, like, enlightenment shines through in short moments. Like I was discussing the flow state. If you're an artist, or if you like music and you're just lost yourself on the dance floor, you're in a flow state. You're no longer, it's like you transcend the ego. There is no you. You're just in the flow. And those are moments of enlightenment. We all experience them sometimes, and people don't even realize that that's what they're experiencing.
That's right. Justin, have you felt that way before?
Not particularly. I did want to mention that when I grew up playing baseball, that was kind of a lot of my childhood and high school experience, and I actually used meditation to help me as a batter. When I would come up to bat, I would kind of picture a baseball being thrown at me and being able to kind of watch the ball as it spins towards me. One of my favorite baseball players was Ted Williams, and he's probably one of the best pure hitters in baseball history. And he was able to pick up the spin on a ball as it was being pitched toward him, and he could distinguish which kind of pitch that was, whether it's a fastball or a curveball or a slider, just by watching the rotation of the ball. So I tried to kind of visualize that as I was meditating, and then it kind of helped me try and pick up the spin on the ball as it was being, thrown at me live. Um, Enlightenment, no, I haven't really caught that, but it's had its other benefits for sure.
I think you're probably more mindful than you give yourself credit for. I don't think you have ever taken your focus or mindfulness off on the spin of the ball of life, and you're always right there, and you're always in the center where you're needed, and you always respond appropriately. So I want to acknowledge and thank you for that.
Cool, thanks, man. Tara, I had a question about you have experience as a doula.
Yes.
How did you get into that? And tell me what kind of duties you have as a doula.
Okay. So a doula is like a childbirth support person, and support as in like mental, emotional, physical. It is not medical, as opposed to like a midwife. Um, so I came to that after having my first child. Again, I was 20 years old. I didn't really know anything about anything. So I just had the standard birth experience, go to the hospital. My pregnancy was induced, so it could be easily scheduled. I had the IV, I had the epidural, which then meant I couldn't really feel to push, which meant they had to pull them out with a vacuum. And I was very lucky. A lot of people, then end up in a C-section after that, and then you have to have one again for future pregnancies and everything. So, like, after he was born, and I went through what I did and realized it's called the cascade of interventions, basically. I realized I didn't want to go through that again for my next child. Me and my son were both very lucky that despite going through all that, we ended up okay. But it was scary. He had like a large hematoma on his head from being pulled out. And so I wanted my next experience, I wanted to be more informed. And it was suggested to me to get a doula, because not only do they support you during the actual birth, but during your pregnancy, they kind of make you aware of your options, give you resources. And a doula supports a woman no matter, like, a woman can have a planned C-section and have a doula. Like, a doula's job is not to convince people to go natural, but if you want to, it's very highly recommended, because you're up against a lot of things that will make it hard for you to do that if you want to give birth in the typical American hospital. So I did have a doula with my second baby, who was born at the hospital, but I was managed to have him naturally. And through her support, she came over to my house before we left for the hospital and started supporting me there. And then when we got to the hospital, like, she knew all my wishes. She rubbed my back. She was great. So after that birth, I thought, oh my gosh, I want to do this for people. I want to help people. And so I took a training and became a doula, which I did for about 6 years. I supported people through all kinds of births, home births, hospital births, C-sections, and not only through the birth, but like helping with breastfeeding afterwards. I would do a home visit to her home in the first few days after birth to just like, offer support. And it was such a beautiful thing to do. It also was really hard emotionally, though, because supporting these women and knowing their wishes and then watching them just get pushed around or stomped over in the hospital and there's nothing you could do, that really also took a toll. And then by the time I had my third baby, I had to quit being a doula because I couldn't be on call anymore with like 3 kids at home. But supporting women and things about like pregnancy and birth and breastfeeding is a passion of mine. It will always be a passion of mine. Maybe one day I'll go on to teach prenatal yoga or something like that. So that was definitely a special and magical time. I worked with a home birth midwife some, and attending those births with her were my favorite because the like divine feminine energy, the woman's body and everything was allowed to just operate as it was meant. In those first moments, instead of it being like traumatic and bright lights and people running around and them whisking the baby away and the mom not getting to hold it for however long, like, all that was taken out, and it was just like the most beautiful experience of like the baby placed directly on the mother's chest and everybody's like surrounded in a loving nature. And then my last 2 babies, so I have 4, my last 2, I had 2 doulas at my third birth, which was a home birth. And then my 4th birth, I had 1 doula. It was also a home birth, and that was during COVID. It was in 2020, and it was right at like the height of everyone freaking out, and they weren't even letting women's partners or their doulas into the birth. Like they were sending mothers by themselves. And I was already having a home birth, but had I not been, like, I would have anyway at that point. So, and those were both water births, which was an amazing experience. Yeah, I'm definitely a big advocate for all those things.
That's great. You are very well-rounded in everything that you do. You can tell you have a passion for everything, and thanks for coming on to share that with us.
Yes,
Well,
thank you.
thanks for having me.
And thank you for the work you're doing on the planet, Tara, and for increasing the light and increasing the good. I mean, it's really needed and appreciated, and it's just great having you on the planet and making a difference. Thank you.
And now on to my favorite topic,
But
aliens. You mentioned that you would be interested in talking about aliens, and so this is something that I am very passionate about, as is Bears. But tell us kind of your story on your interest in aliens and extraterrestrials.
Okay. So I can't remember the first time I saw a UFO. I've always watched the sky. Like, I'm just into nature. I love being out. Grew up in the country. There's not a light pollution. So I was probably maybe a kid when I first would notice random things in the sky. Um, and then, and this was before, like, now people can say, oh, it was probably a drone. But like back then, there was nothing else just randomly flying around. Um, so I don't know how many times I've seen UFO as lights in the sky, but a more recent time, like within the last few years, I had a very odd experience where I was driving during the day down the highway, and like I saw a shadow go like cover the road as if I was driving under a cloud or something had flown over me or something. And when I looked up, there was not a cloud in the sky. There was nothing. And I'm like, well, that's weird because something flew over me, but it's invisible, but it still cast a shadow. I don't know. So like that was a really weird one. Um, and then I have a Mystic Martian Alien Oracle card deck. It's really kind of just for fun, but I really love that one. And I have one alien encounter experience. This happened in maybe 2018 or so. And I was in my kitchen. This was like 3 a.m. My roommate was asleep. My kids were asleep. I was completely sober. Uh, and I was making a sandwich. And out of the corner of my eye at my kitchen table, like it was like a flash of I saw this figure sitting there. And it was such a quick flash that I didn't even like pay attention to it because I thought it was just an intrusive thought or something like that. And I was making a turkey sandwich and I got it out of the oven and I sat it down on my kitchen table and I turned around to get myself a drink. And then I turned back around again and the sandwich was gone. And so then I thought, okay, like, did I really see something there?
Wow.
But it was like, I'm sure there's probably all kinds of aliens, but this one to me, it seemed like it was a non-physical entity in the same way that maybe like a ghost or an angel or something, it would just like materialize and dematerialize. There was no like, it walked out the door or like whatever. So I don't know. And it didn't look like any depiction of an alien from science fiction or alien lore. It wasn't a gray. It didn't have the head shape. It was a peach-ish color, and its head shape was like a Homer Simpson, like the end of a hot dog. So like it wasn't even something that I'd like seen before and just thought about. Like I'd never seen something like that before.
Yeah.
And it didn't have a mouth. So I'm like, is it just wanting to like research what we're eating? Because I doubt it ate, it didn't have a physical body. Anyway, it was like definitely a strange experience. That's the only time I've actually seen an alien.
Well,
do
a
you have
lot of
an,
the times the aliens are known as shapeshifters, so
Mhm.
they can definitely be unrecognizable or even invisible at times. So yeah, that's interesting you saw that, because it's not your conventional looking alien.
Hmm.
So that, is a very interesting way to look at it.
Have you had any direct encounters with aliens, Justin?
I'm not sure. um, a couple years ago, I thought it was just a really vivid dream, but I was on a craft, and I don't know how to really explain it, but the craft was made out of like rings, and there was an outer ring and an inner ring, and
Hmm.
where I was sitting was an inner ring, but I could see out, and the ring was just rotating around and around and around, and I felt the push of the craft, or not even the craft, but of the rotation, kind of keeping me locked in place. And I had seen a figure that was really tall and skinny, long fingernails,
Hmm.
not also not really your typical alien, um, but definitely alien to human looking figure. And I was just kind of stuck in this area, and pushed back by the force of the rotation. And I remember the feeling more than the actual visuals of it. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if that was a dream or I was taken, um, or what, but that's as close as I get to an encounter with a being.
It's interesting because it's like I've had dreams, or I think they're dreams, but it's
Yeah,
like how could you really know if you were just dreaming, or did they actually take you and just like make you think you had a dream?
exactly.
So I completely understand what you're saying. I have had a few dreams like that.
Yeah,
And random missing time too.
yeah,
Like driving down the road, and the next thing I know, it's like way off time, not just like,
mhm.
oh, I zoned out for a minute, but like way off. And like my husband's been with me, and he's like, yeah, that I felt that too, but like who knows, I guess.
Yeah. That's also common with alien encounters and UFO, seeing the UFO and stuff. I have a little bit of missing time from one time I saw something as well. I've seen, I'd say, four different UFOs now. And I'll talk quickly about the most recent one. Was just a couple weeks ago. I'm a filmmaker. I make movies, and I just made a sci-fi alien movie. And the guy that was the cinematographer, his name is Steven. I had Steven over for dinner one night, and as he was leaving for the night, we were standing outside, and we were just talking. And I live it's called the South Valley in Albuquerque, and it's kind of a little bit away from the city. And airspace above me is a common area for airplanes to go by, because just down the road is the airport, and then on the other side of the airport is the Air Force Base. And so I'm constantly seeing planes and stuff like that fly by. And I was talking to Steven about that. I'm like, yeah, I see stuff all the time. I'm constantly looking to see if there's something interesting going on. And I'll keep my eye on something until I know it's a plane. And no more than a minute after we kind of talked about that, directly across the street, I saw a ball, like I'd say a whitish yellow ball moving in the sky, and it was lower down, almost a little bit above the horizon, and it looked exactly like a comet, but it was traveling from right to left horizontally. It wasn't coming down from up in the sky. It was traveling horizontally. I was like, Steven, look, look. And I pointed it out. And then it disappeared behind the house across the street from me. That's how low it was in the sky. And I know it wasn't a comet, or a comet, or a well, whatever whatever else is in the sky, or even just a meteor. It looked exactly like a meteor or a comet because it had kind of a tail on the end of it. But like I said, it was traveling low, just above the horizon, and traveling horizontally right to left. So I know it was neither one of those. And it disappeared behind the house across the street. Steven only saw it for like a fraction of a second because he was looking somewhere else when I saw it. By the time I motioned or said to him to look, but he did see it. So we both saw it. Don't know what it was. Um, so that was my most recent encounter.
You know, this stuff has been such a big part of my life ever since I can remember coming back to the planet. When I say coming back, reincarnating. They use, I have pre-birth memories, but that's probably for another show. When I was a very young child, I remember being in the crib and having these giant, what I perceived as giant owls coming to visit me. Now, how did I know what an owl was at that age, at like, less than a year old, or maybe a year
Yeah.
and a half at most? But sure enough, my perception of these creatures were owls that would come and talk to me and be like, it's going to be okay. It's not always going to be like this, because there was a point I remember thinking, geez, I came back to experience this, felt like a prisoner in a crib, of course, right? Thinking there's got to be more than this. But anyways, I've always had some sort of quote unquote paranormal experience throughout all of my life. I remember one time having an encounter with some of the visitors and just thinking. I remember, first of all, I said to them, "Why did you choose me? Like, what is so significant about me?" And one of them responds, "It's your light, the intensity at which you shine." And I was like a teenager. That didn't mean anything to me as a teenager, right? And I've also been on what I perceived as motherships, huge ships, in these huge areas within the ship, with people from all over the world, and some of them were also from off planet. We were shown what would happen to the Earth, these cataclysms, if we didn't reverse our destructive ways. And that happened to me twice. I remember thinking, man, I'm just one person. What am I going to do to affect change like that on this planet, right? And I still haven't figured that out, and I still kind of feel weird about not being able to fulfill that to some degree. But I think the best we can do is just do this, just like we're doing today, talking to each other, right? And having integrity in life and just doing the best you can. And another time, I had this telepathic, again, because it seems natural for me to speak to them telepathically. I remember thinking, who made you? And the answer came back, we're made from the same source, from the same God. Now that was astonishing. And it's 2025 now. And at some point, hopefully, we're going to stop pretending or fearing that maybe we're not the only people home in the galactic neighborhood, right? I mean, it's statistically impossible. Tara, in your neighborhood, you probably have neighbors on your road. And Justin, I'm sure you have neighbors, right? Of some sort, some description. So why would it be any different for us on this planet not to have neighbors in neighboring star systems? And I'm sure all three of us are aware that we do, and that we're not alone on this planet, right? And it's time that, we as a species just sort of evolved out of fear and out of this unnecessary warmongering just to prop up the economy, right? Can't we grow out of that eventually and put all those resources into what Buckminster Fuller lovingly said is, instead of putting your money into weaponry, put it into livenry.
Yeah.
Increase the quality of life for everyone on Earth, right?
Yeah. There's an interesting analogy when we talk about, how expansive the universe is, and we don't even know how big it is or if it's infinite. It's like taking um, a glass and filling it up with ocean water and saying, There are no whales in there in this water. There's no whales in this cup, therefore there's no whales that exist. So that's kind of, looking at the universe by taking a small sample size of what we have around us and looking and just saying, oh, aliens don't exist because, they're not here right now. So yeah, that is an interesting way, I think, to look at that. Uh, and also bears, it's a common theme amongst visitors, extraterrestrial visitors. Even if you look at the day the Earth stood still, they were there coming to warn us that we're going to ruin our planet. And there's also, been sightings around like nuclear missile silos and stuff like that. There's always a lot of UFOs seen around them, which is reports of that. So, maybe they are here to warn us that we're about to, you know, become extinct. Or some people think they're us from the future coming back to tell us, hey, you need to change your ways.
Well,
So,
it's my understanding when the first atomic bomb was detonated, it caused a lot of catastrophic destruction in other dimensions, the reverberations of it, and of course the radiation. And at that point, I believe it was decided that, hey, these talking chimps on this planet can't be trusted to run their own life because look what they've come up with, look what they've invented, you
yeah.
know? So thankfully, there are forces out there um, choosing to guide humankind into more peaceful paths. And I'm really grateful and thankful for that. And there are enough people on Earth right now who are awakened and on the path of awareness, like Tara and her generation, of course, and of even some people from our gen, right? So hopefully there's a tipping point coming where the heart will open to the point of the mere thought of solving anything with death and destruction becomes just a non-solution. It can no longer be seen as a solution for anything because it doesn't lead to the kind of outcome that benefits all of humankind. It may benefit the smaller percentage number of the so-called elite, and if they really were elite, they wouldn't create death and destruction and oppression.
Yeah.
And with that said, I think peace not only begins with our thoughts but by our actions too. So we all have to be responsible for the energy we bring to daily life, whether it's getting in traffic and being cut off and just saying, hey, you know what, he's human, and or they're human and probably the best they can today, as opposed to sending out negative energy constantly, because that also has a larger ramification across the whole planet. And I
Yeah.
know I'm digressing here, of course. So and I see the time's probably time to wrap this up. But Tara, would you come back and talk to us again?
Yeah, yeah, I would love to. I could talk about these things all day.
Great. Yeah, we do plan on doing a full episode about aliens and UFOs and stuff
And
like that.
cryptoids. Yeah.
Yeah, and cryptoids. Yeah, we're planning it. We just haven't got around to it, but we will do it for the listeners that keep hearing us say that. We will be doing it. But Tara, thank you so much for being on. You were a great guest, very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I just read something the other day that I would like to share, and I thought of it, Bears, when you said you weren't sure if you were fulfilling your bringing out your light and everything. And I read this from a yoga guru, and he had said that we have karma, like with all people, anyone that we come into contact with, it's like a karmic relationship. We don't communicate with every single person on the planet. It's just whoever comes into our space, and that's because either like you have karma to give them something or teach them something. They have karma to only learn that specifically from you. And so by just being yourself and like having this podcast or literally talking and connecting with anybody that you come across in your life, you are already fulfilling those karmic debts or karmic benefits just by being you and being here.
Well,
Great.
thank you. And we're absolutely happy that you could be here today. And we thank your family for sacrificing their time with you. We greatly appreciate that, and that of your aunt's time as well. Thank you.
Thank you again. You've been listening to the Bearly Audible Podcast. Tune in
And
next
keep your
week.
love light shining, everyone.